Okay, Tony Mormino with HVAC TV, and today our episode is going to focus on air distribution. I'm going to call this Air Distribution 101, Andy. What do you think?
I think that's a good answer.
Well, good. Good. And I've got Andy Hayes here joining us with Air Carolinas in Charlotte. What's going on down there in Charlotte today, Andy?
Well, it's a great day, but those of us in the Southeast struggle with this time of year. So I apologize for my watery eyes and my runny nose and my cough, because it is full-blown pollen season.
For those who don't suffer from allergies, you don't know how good you got it during this time of year. I'm terrible too with the allergies. It's just god awful.
It is.
And I live in the most picturesque place, like up here in the mountains, and the flowers are beautiful, but I see them and I'm like, oh, here we go again.
Yep, here we are. And it's bad when you can see the tire tracks and the pollen on the road. It just...
Exactly. Oh, well, life could be worse. I think if we had 100 people in the room and everybody told us their worst problem, we'd probably feel pretty grateful today. So
Yeah, absolutely.
What do they say? You put 100 people put their problems in the hat, and you can pick one out. You'd pull your guy out of there real quick.
Right.
I'm a big fan of gratitude and looking at that side of things. But so, thanks for coming on, Andy. First time on the show. We're merging a couple companies here in the Carolinas. We're going to be Air Carolina. Well, we are Air Carolinas now. So I'm excited to have you. You're an expert in a lot of areas that I know enough about, being in the industry a long time. Air distribution is one of those. I've never sold air distribution products. I know the basics of them, but I'm looking forward to getting into like maybe some myths and some stuff we could teach people. The purpose of the show, or the tagline of the show, is to educate and empower the HVAC community. So whatever we could do to bring value. We get a lot of contractors listening and a lot of engineers, some sales guys, some building owners, maintenance guys, and stuff like that, engineer operators. But so we'll get into that. So, when I hear air distribution, I think of grills, registers, and diffusers.
Right.
GRD. Here's how bad I am. So we were on a meeting, you and I and a bunch of other people, as we merge our companies, around a meeting, and the term GRD came up, and I was like, yes, I was thinking, oh yeah, grills, registers. So it took me a minute to even know what that was. That's how out of that side of the business I've been in. So let's start with the basics: grills, registers, diffusers. Let's talk about the difference between the three.
Awesome. So, a grill is it's a stationary, no moving parts. Everybody has them, especially on returns. If you look up in your ceiling, wherever you are, you can see it. It's a hole cover. Let's be honest, it just covers the ductwork. Right. The architects like to say it's aesthetically pleasing. The manufacturer makes me say that. None of us notice. A register is more like what you have at home. It has one moving part. You can adjust that little knob and change where the flow goes, but it's just a hole cover. A diffuser is an engineered product because we want to push that air throughout your space, and it can't be too loud and it can't be too noisy, and it has to be aesthetically pleasing. Mm-hmm. The diffuser placement is critical because, why we're talking about air distribution, and people forget. Yes, that big metal box on the roof is really important, but it doesn't really matter if the occupant doesn't sit in an area of well-mixed air. Understand?
Yeah.
So, ASHRAE, who sets our guidelines, has a great standard for the percent of people who need to feel satisfied for that to be a good system. You know what that number is?
I don't. I'm assuming it's 70%, 80%?
Great. It's 80%.
Right.
So if 5 people are in a room, one person, tough luck, right?
Right. Which is always going to be the case, pretty much.
100%. And the great thing for us as HVAC professionals is we're going to comfort some people, but some other people who just like to complain, they get to complain. So we satisfy them too.
Right. Exactly.
So if you think about some industrial applications or data centers, great example. In a data center, is this a good design or not? Well, if this center has been running for whatever 99.98% of the time for the last 4 months, that, hey, that's a good design. Space, like an office space, how do we really know our occupants? Some people just run hot, some people run cold. Did you exercise this morning? Are you drinking coffee? Or are you in your cycle? I mean, there's all those things. And ASHRAE has standards. There's two big categories. One is CLO, which is how you're dressed. And there's a chart for that. And the other is MET, which is your individual, how your body runs, your metabolism. And
did you say CLO?
Yeah, CLO.
CLO. Okay. This is new to me. CLO and then MET.
MET is
like your metabolism, basically.
Your metabolism. And the joke, very smart person once told me is there's a probe for that, and I'm not looking for volunteers.
So,
yeah,
you'll be here all week. He'll be here all week, folks.
At least a while. So the individual drives a lot of that comfort. And if you or I were facilities people in a large building, how would we run our system? Well, if we were smart, in cooling season, we would tick up the building 1 degree about every day or two until people started to complain. And then
good, yeah.
Because some people are going to complain. We need a lot of people to complain. And occupant comfort is the reason we're here. So air distribution is really about, we need to make people comfortable in their space. You and I are terrible at typing with our gloves on. And if it's cold, we're not going to be productive in whatever our roles are. And if it's hot, and we don't need people going out in the parking lot in winter to warm up or cool down. It's just like in the summer. Yes, there's some building safety. We need to dehumidify the space. We need to do freeze protection. So there needs to be a little bit of, added, but it's really about the people. And air distribution is how we get there.
So much goes into it. It's so funny when you were talking about the placement of it. I was and I'm always looking for like photos to post on social media. Hey, why do you think this is happening? What would you do to solve it? That's one of my favorite things to post. And a lot of times I
love it.
A lot of times I'm like, well, obviously I know the answer to it. But then people will post the answer. And I'm like, man, I never thought of that. Even after 25 years, it's like, now this particular case, I did kind of know the answer, but it was an air distribution issue where I walked into in the Sanford Airport, right outside of Orlando.
Yes.
There's a hole where you sit waiting for the airplane. They got all the windows, right? There's a bunch of windows there. Well, it was morning, 9 a.m. or something like that. And they were completely fogged over. They were condensed over the window. So I went up and looked at the window. First thing that surprised me was it was a single pane window, which I didn't know you could do that. Commercial buildings, totally out of loop on that. So I was shocked at that. All the fog was on the outside. I said, okay, this will be an interesting question to pose because some people will say dehumidify the space, which has nothing to do with the fog being on the outside. Right. So I immediately looked up at the diffusers. Well, there were 4 ways and they were blowing they were blowing 4 different directions, but one of the directions was right on the window. So I'm like, okay, that's an easy fix. I would probably make that a 3-way diffuser and be done with it, right? So I posted it. So when you were talking about the placement, I'm thinking how one little switch like that, and to come in there and retrofit the airport would probably cost $200 a diffuser. It would be very cheap for that one area to change that whole perspective of, that. So
absolutely. So, we go back to the fancy, if you have a custom air handler that some manufacturer worked really hard to get it some very, very high efficiency.
I know where you're going, right?
Right. And if that comes through a diffuser in your ceiling,
right,
and it short circuits right to the return, nobody cares. Nobody cares about how good that unit is because we can't mix the air. Right. So the air in the space, back to occupied people, comfort, I think universities and some larger buildings where they have the occupancy sensor, especially in conference room. We've all been in conference rooms where it turns off. Everything shuts down. The lights go off. The AC system goes off and it just sits there. And if on Monday afternoon you walk into that space, you just found out what what I think archaeologists find when they dig up the crypt, right? That
may be a little extreme, Andy, but I get how you're going.
I have to make sure you understand what I'm saying. And so let's say you sit down in a chair in the conference room and some smart design engineer who designed with intent a long time ago.
Totally get it.
set that room to be 6 air changes per hour. Let's use 6 because the math's easy. So every 10 minutes, that air should totally change. But I'm in my chair at that table and I feel nothing. And I'm just there because maybe part of the room is churning and has some ventilation efficiency and some turnover, but not the whole space. And it's critical because, again, it doesn't matter how much energy we're saving if the people still feel, it's hot, it's humid.
Right.
And, you feel, as HVAC addicts, as you like to say, sometimes we use that word as the colloquialism, right? It's actually tempering the air and it's ventilating the air with fresh air or outside air, which isn't necessarily fresh, but it's also humidification control, filtration, and some version of neutralization, which we'll leave for another day. But our occupant, if we want them to be engaged and feel comfortable, we got to mix the air, and that's all about GRD, which is, when you think about the cost of the mechanical system, the GRD is pennies, but that's where you actually get the impact. So I like to use car analogies.
I never thought of it that way.
Right? So I like to use car analogies. If you go to a specialty engine builder, and you buy this really fancy high horsepower engine, and you put it in your junk car that has a bad transmission and bad suspension and all
right.
You call up the guy and say, hey, this engine's terrible. And they go, no. Fix the rest of it. That's where our really nice custom air handler up on the roof is great. But the distribution system and how we get the air to the occupied space becomes so critical.
Right, because that's where the rubber meets the road. I think you said in one of your talking points you were talking about, like that's where it all hits home. And if that's not right, so speaking of like being addicted to HVAC, are you constantly, like when you're out to dinner with friends and family, you're looking at the thing and do you even say anything, or are you just mentally taking a note, or what is your process?
So to your point, I believe all of us weirdos, you only have 2 different styles of pictures on your phone, right? You have your family and you have equipment.
Right.
And you go to the restaurant, your wife looks at you funny because you're all, we were, I wish I had the picture for you available. We were in a restaurant and they had exposed, spiral duct with the vents that we all know, but they had put plastic diffusers over the grill because they probably had a draft on one of the tables or a couple of the tables.
Oh, I see. So
my question to you is, that $10 plastic diffuser, do you know how much that messed up the air distribution in the space?
Right.
And yes, we are all addicted and we do look up. And sometimes my wife points out to me, nobody else is looking.
Right. Hey, they're lost, man.
Right?
Trying to keep you comfortable around here.
Exactly. And, our other save, this could be our tagline. HVAC is a dissatisfier.
Ooh, that could be the title. You just came up with the title. I don't pick the title until after the episode. So
awesome.
Say that again. So
HVAC is a dissatisfier because no one other than weirdos like us walks into a space and says,
love it.
This is very comfortable. What do? People complain. It's hot. It's cold. I can smell too much humanity. It's
right.
It's really hard. So if you think about the job for a design engineer or an installing contractor, the best thing that could happen for them is they never hear anything back.
Never notice.
Right?
You're discomfortable. Yeah.
What a challenge. Goes back to maybe we should work in data centers where at least the equipment will complain when it's uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. Data centers are it's easier to cool equipment than it is people. That's for sure.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So air distribution in terms of comfort is one side of it. And then you have the acoustics, which is the other side of it. I mean, there's so much that goes into acoustics in a space, but I'm kind of learning a lot of that as I got my paneling behind us here. And there's
great.
There was an artist in the office next to us who's not there anymore. She was real quiet. Now there's a couple people there who are on their phone all the time. They're not very quiet. So I got to figure out what I'm going to do with that wall.
Right. right. But to your point about acoustics, especially with Class A office space, the new trend is no ceiling. We're going to show you all the mechanicals. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but the challenge is that equipment, to make that equipment quiet. There's a lot of extra first time cost, and what we see, especially in the city of Charlotte, as we go vertical, that if you make that office really quiet, you know what happens? Those people are mad because that person over there types really hard, or that one is talking on the phone. So we have white noise.
Yep.
But we spent all that money to make, so maybe the fan
Then you put a white noise generator in there. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe the fan noise was good if we can keep it constant. I don't know if you can hear it, but the fan just turned off in my office. And it's a challenge, right? Of how quiet versus how loud versus annoying,
right?
Which is the same conversation as comfort, because some people won't care. Like if you go into a space, sometimes don't you like it when you hear the fan kick out? You're like, oh, here comes some better air.
Yeah. You know, I had an acoustician, I got to learn how to say that word right, on the show. And he was talking about the dangers of a space that's too quiet. He said that's actually very uncomfortable for humans. So that when we were talking about the white noise generator, I was just thinking about that. And I was just in a corporate office of a big national manufacturer, and they had the open office and they had open cubicles, but it was the most peaceful, quietest. It wasn't uncomfortably quiet. They did have a noise generator in there, but that takes, like you said, a lot of care and planning and design with someone who knows what they're doing. But people were on the phone, literally 3 or 4 cubes from me, and I could barely even hear them. It was
so they did a great job.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny. I won't say the name, but there's an engineering firm here in Charlotte that's moving their office. They're in one of the high rises and they're moving a little bit farther out. And they took a poll they're an architectural firm and MEP. And they took a poll of all the employees, and the two complaints were 100% of the people said, we need parking because parking is really expensive. And the HVAC system is horrendous. And you know what they do for a living? Part of that designs HVAC systems in noise, comfort. It all comes back to air distribution.
Yeah, a bad HVAC system it makes everything bad. It doesn't matter how beautiful the office is, you know?
Right.
It's just a rough work environment when there's hot and cold spots and it's loud and, you know, it's dirty and just, you know, yeah.
And, you know, when you think about from the building owner's perspective, we're not here to save energy. Let me preface that. We are all stewards of the economy or the environment, and we want to be sustainable.
Sure.
But really, an example is, you know, there's a great amusement park right here on the border of North and South Carolina. And during the pandemic, they were closed. You know, they didn't have a party at the end of the year celebrating how much energy they didn't spend.
Right.
And you can't run the building. Energy is important, but you can't run the building. There's an adage that, you know, for every dollar, basically for a small office, not manufacturing, but just an office building, for every dollar in electricity equates to like $10 in rent or the mortgage. And the insurance. But that also equates to $100 in people. And if we tried to save 1% of the energy by turning off the HVAC system, what happens to the productivity of our most expensive asset, which is the people?
Right.
And therein lies the rub. And if you can't get the air mixed at the right condition, the right humidity, no smells, better oxygen, you get more efficiency from your people, which is, you know, it's the number one asset.
Which is good. It's good business all around. Speaking of that, I'm curious what you're seeing. So I'm in a little bit of a bubble up here, and I get out to some manufacturing facilities, but I'm not on the street with the customers, the engineers and contractors as much as I used to be. Is there a push to get people back into the office, and are owners finding a hard time doing that? Or let's use engineering firms, since, you know, a lot of people listening to this are engineers. Are they often working remotely still and having trouble getting people back in, or do they want people back in, or what are you seeing out there?
You know, at least in our area around Charlotte, it's all over the board.
Okay.
We have engineering firms that are in the office every minute of the working week.
Mm-hmm.
They have some firms that only come in 1 day a week.
Mm-hmm.
They have firms that everybody comes to the office 2 days, but they don't all come in the same 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, I understand the remote option works great for some people,
Mm-hmm.
but how do you train young people?
That's the thing, right? Like, how much did we learn? I mean, I learned from the guys in the office around me, you know? Often the guy was on the phone frustrated and he's maybe saying a few words he shouldn't be, we're not going to say on this podcast, at least. Maybe we will. I don't know. We never know what comes out, but you know what I'm
Right.
saying? And then you learn from, hey man, what happened? You know, explain this to me. And he explains it. And of course, when you're new, you're like, don't understand what the heck's going on anyway. But
Right.
you learn so much that way. Or if you're stuck, you know, you could go, hey Steve, can you help me with this? You know?
Right. And everybody wants to help you. You just have to reach out. You know, it's funny if you think about, I'm supposed to politely say experienced people like you and I. Back in the day, when you drew with a pencil, you actually had to do mechanical drawings. You really understood what had to happen to make for someone to assemble that. For instance, if you're drawing ductwork, you would figure out the transitions and you would know where you're going and where your placements are. Where CAD is awesome, it's so efficient. The challenge is if I made a mistake, let's say I made whatever 20-inch in diameter, I wanted 18 inches, I could just hit that button and it would change my entire drawing.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't understand how hard that is, especially to the guy out in the field who has to make those transitions. And,
Right.
and so there's value. Computers are great, right? There's a reason for all of us. And sometimes we have to go out and we have to see the equipment and understand. I like you always show the psychrometric charts, which is awesome. And I know, there's a bunch of apps that are great, but you can't get it from the app. It just gives you that number where you have to see how that line goes across on the psychrometric chart and figure out the 7 variables and kind of feel it and see it to understand.
The best way I learned is trying to figure out what the problem was. Why is there a problem? They're hot or they're cold. Usually you get it's hot, it's cold, it's humid, and then you backtrack into the equipment. And I still carry around a hydrometer, today. I use it all the time. But if you're new, you get one of those, you can get them on Amazon pretty cheap, and then bring a printed psych chart and plot out the outdoor air, the return air, the mixed air, what happens after the coil, if you can get to it, the supply air, and just look at what's going on. You could tell real quick, it's not reheating. It's just an elevated leaving air temperature because the humidity's here, but you can't tell that without at least I can't without a chart. But, you bring up a good point about getting out into the field. And, I'll go back to this yesterday, 2 days ago, I was in a big facility, engineering design facility for a major chiller manufacturer. And I was at JDAC, the Johnson Controls Advanced Development. I don't know why I'm afraid to say that. I'm going to have them I've had them on the show. We've done all these.
I'm pretty sure you had it on the internet. So
I know. What am I doing here? Why am I keeping that a secret? So, but I was there and we were talking about the importance of, you talk about hands-on, and the people there who work with the equipment, you think you know stuff until you go and talk to those folks. You don't know squat. Tony doesn't know squat. Tony, the marketing / ex-sales guy, until you get out there and talk to these guys, you're like totally clueless, like what's involved in developing a chiller, centrifugal chiller. They had these rooms where it was like -20, and then the room next to it was 170 degrees, and they were testing the machines to make sure they operated, all these data points. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it was funny because the guys doing the hot room and the cold room, they're like, the cold room guys are like, it's so easy to heat a room. This is harder over here. We got to use this ammonia refrigeration to make the room cold. So they had this little back and forth. And it was just fun. It was cool to see that side of the business. We've done quite a few posts lately on, because we get a lot of questions. Hey, how do I get in commercial sales? And there's all different types of jobs in our industry. Like there's this huge service tech shortage. So a lot of people focus on the trades. And then there's, the manufacturing, then there's the testing and engineering, which is the lab I was just in. Yeah. And then there's commercial sales. So Andy, let's talk a little bit about how you got into sales and what.
That's a great introduction. Thank you for the lead in. The point is we have great manufacturers. And those manufacturers make great equipment. And you've made the point in podcasts in the past that generally it's not the equipment, it's the application of the equipment. And all those men and women who are designing that equipment, they're spot on. And their labs are calibrated and they have standards set by the whichever industry, if it's CTI or HRI. And they use the cleanest air possible, and they make good stuff. But they can't be there in the field talking to our construction people. And that's why mechanical reps like ourselves have such an opportunity. This isn't going to be, I went to the website and I put it in my cart. It's mechanical equipment, and there's going to be problems. And it's how do we address those problems? Because
so true.
Goes back to air distribution. The unit on the roof is going to work great.
Yep.
But if we can't, if we have some crazy distribution system where the ductwork is doing turns and choking down, we're not going to get airflow. Fans aren't going to perform. People aren't going to feel comfort.
Right.
And that's part of our role as to, we want to do a great job and not have any issues. We want to be, like we said before, the design engineer who never hears back. But really the value of the rep is in the bad things happen.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up. First of all, two takeaways from what you just said there, and all of it was great, is, I'm still looking for that perfect piece of equipment to sell, right? Like, that does not exist. The more complex stuff, the more opportunity for problems. It's just how it is.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I made this comment the other day to someone. I said, look, it's a miracle any of this stuff works ever. Like, there's so many pieces.
Agreed.
To you look at a 70-ton DOAS unit with 4 compressors and all the sensors and bores, and, and plus, I'm going to say this to the folks out there who, we hear this comment all the time. You guys are making it so complicated. It's that way for a reason. It's because the tolerances in the space have gotten so tight, and the energy efficiency requirements, these are all driven by customer and governmental needs, the complexity. When I started, there was a couple thermostats and a couple compressors, but you didn't get the tight tolerance controls you have today. So anyway, there's that part of it. But, every equipment has the potential to have problems. There's, you take this piece of equipment, you put it on a 40-foot semi and you pound it across the country for a couple of days, it's probably going to have a loose thing here and there. That's just how it is. So there's that. But what really struck me, what you said is, and this, I had this experience early in my career where I was working for a major manufacturer. I was calling on the largest contractor in Jacksonville at the time, and we had a problem at a job. I can't remember what the problem was, but it was a problem, right? And I was showing up every day. I was like, hey, here's what we're doing, yada, yada, yada. And I was apologizing to this VP, who was a very important person at this firm. He said, and he goes, Tony, look, you're here every day handling it. That's what separates the people who care and the people who don't care. We can have any problem. If you're here to help fix it, that's fine. And I was like, oh, that's important. So what you said a minute ago, which is, it's how, and it proved that, it's, I think our character and our professionalism comes out in the problems, right? Anybody can handle a good situation, right? But you got to be there and show up. That's what separates us, right?
100%. 100%. Now let me get back to what you said, how I got here. So I'm one of those people cursed with mechanical ability. So when I was little, they knew I was going to be an engineer.
Wait, did you take stuff apart at home?
Yeah. And I
had trouble putting it back together. Did you get in trouble a few times, like VCR?
Of course. But I got to the point where I could, make the lawnmower run better. And,
nice.
Make bikes out of multiple bikes and all those things. So everybody knew I was going to be an engineer. So I began my professional career as a HVAC design engineer in the automotive world.
And, wait a second. Really? That's nice.
Yeah.
So you're a mechanical engineering degree?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mechanical engineering degree. We can talk about that later. But so I worked for a big company. I won't tell you who. They used to be the number one vehicle manufacturer in the world. Anyway.
Got it.
The really awesome experience. All us HVAC geeks don't think about what goes in. A 2,200, 2,400 square foot house has good insulation. It's locked up pretty tight. There's some leakage. The air is recirculated inside.
Mm-hmm.
The cooling load is roughly 3 tons.
Mm-hmm.
A 4-door sedan or SUV has bad insulation. It's all outside air unless you hit the little button. It sits in the parking lot 120 degrees. The glass goes all the way around. It's like a greenhouse.
Right.
And that little car cooling load is 3 tons.
Is it really? I never really thought of that. I've always been told that the HVAC system in a car is very challenging to get.
Without a doubt. And
It's
remember,
very complex. And then,
the evaporator core face is only this big,
oh my gosh.
right? And we're still unifying. We still have design temperature. So the other thing, cars, that's high volume manufacture. So in a building, we can design the system, and then we have the test and balance guy come in and tune it, and we can tweak it, and we can get comfort. And in cars, you make 30,000 cars, then they get shipped to the dealership, make 30,000 more while those get sold. And if there's a problem, all of a sudden you have 100,000 cars.
Recall time, right?
Right. So that's why it takes 2.5, 3 years for, the vehicle HVAC system to be designed and developed. And like you said, with the truck, you're lumpity dumpity down the road and everything has to work. And people want their level of comfort. So it was a great experience. It's all gone now, sadly. But it taught me a lot about vapor compression, refrigeration, and liquid. And then I moved on to the manufacturer side for some hydronic equipment. But like you, we all found out that the sales side is a different challenge. It's a little more rewarding. You kind of control yourself. So
it's almost like your own business in a way.
100%.
Especially if you're 100% commission, which a lot of the jobs are. It's kind of like your own thing. You could work as much or as little. Well, you can't work as little as you want because you have quotas. You gotta, show up, but you don't have to kill yourself if you don't want to. And some people do, and some people don't. And that's okay either way.
Right. And I think what we really need to tell people as the rep, we're the main customer for the manufacturer, but we're also their employee. And there's that connection. That's why you go to the manufacturer and you take the tours and you see the great people who are behind the curtains in rooms that don't have windows. And we need to project that to our customer, who then builds the unit to sell it to their customer, and their customer in turn is the owner who actually pays the bill.
Love it.
And so our opportunity as reps is you get to call on so many people. Everyone is your customer, but really, you only get paid from the person you sell directly to.
Right.
Which goes back to all those problems and satisfying people. And that's what we're here for, right?
That's right. And, it's funny because from an engineering perspective, I have an engineering degree too. I have actually a chemical engineering degree. I don't know how I got, I know how I got into air conditioning because I wanted to go into sales when I was in school. I was like, I think I want to try sales. And there was no, we had this new thing called the World Wide Web. You remember that?
Yeah.
You couldn't, I remember getting on it. I was like, what is this? I don't even understand. It was like some prompt or something. I couldn't even figure out where. I don't even think websites were there yet. It was so weird. So there was no information. And I asked my counselor once, I said, I'm about to graduate. I have this job offer in this, textiles factory. I'm not excited about it at all. And he said, well, there's this guy here. He's from, X air conditioning company, rhymes with frame. That's how I'll say that. Right. And so I went and talked to him, and he turned out to be my boss for the next 10 years. So that was good. But anybody could be, it's funny. I had this perception of sales as you had to be this really, beer drinking, golfing, partying kind of person. And there are those people who sell that way, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd. I'd rather teach psychometrics and go home and go to bed early. Like that's kind of my way of selling, but you can do sales with all different types of personalities. If you care about the customer and you want to bring value, that's really that's the core ingredient. But you can be any personality, right? Like it doesn't really matter.
100%. We truly are in a relationship business, and it's about people. It's about people because, to your point, the manufacturers, they have this down. Their standards, the equipment is all manufactured, high level of quality, and it's how we put all those pieces together. And that's about people.
100%. And there's this, and I can tell you most of the, there's been a few exceptions, but very rare do I find a salesman who's really just the the caricature of salesmen who's out for themselves. They want to just make money. And you know, I don't have anything wrong with making money. I like making money too, but we get paid by bringing value and bringing service and continuously repeating that. Cause like you said, these are customers. Most of my career was in Jacksonville. When I was there for 20 years, I had the same 80% of customers the whole time I was there, right? Like you can't, it's pretty self-policing, right? Like if you're dishonest or you don't take care of your problems, that's all they know when you're trying to close the next job. Man, I was needing you, and where were you? You know? So it's like, it's real important that you show up and, you know, take care of the customer and the money. And, you know, the money, it's funny, the money always follows the service and the value you provide. It's not the other way around, right? So if you do all that, then the income will come, and you'll have good years and bad years and stuff like that if you're in commission. But
right, as long as you understand that you're not going to make all your money on this one sale,
right?
You're going to make that steady across the way. And you bring up another great point. I was at a career fair at the local college, and our industry is hard because first, nobody knows what HVAC is, right? Even mechanical engineering students don't know what HVAC is.
Right.
And then they hear the word sales and they're like, oh, no, I'm a technical person. I'm a little introverted. I like numbers.
Right.
I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
All of it. Yeah. And it's to communicate that to people and say, yes, there's times where you sit at your computer and you use somebody's software to figure out, actually design a custom air handler. And then there's other times where you're out there in the dirty construction site or the real old mechanical room, right? Everybody's been in that real old mechanical room where you leave footprints in the dust.
Right.
And, you know, my advice to all those people is get out.
Right. Yeah, I love it. And I could tell you too, at least when I was in college, I don't know if it's still the same way. This was, you know, back in 95-ish, but, you know, there was a stigma in engineering school for sales, just like you're saying. It was kind of looked down upon a little bit, but I always just felt like I wanted to do that. I don't know why, but, and, you know, on the introvert front, I am an introvert by nature. And a lot of people are surprised by that because I'm on camera and I'm having fun and stuff, which I do thoroughly enjoy this job. It's been like a great blessing to me, and I'm grateful to have the honor of hosting this podcast and YouTube channel. But you can be introverted too. You know, it doesn't matter. Introverted doesn't mean you don't like people. It just means it takes energy when you're around people. Extroverts get energy from people. Introverts expend energy when they're around people. So,
right.
Like after this podcast, I'm gonna go take a nap for a couple hours because I'm so wiped out. Right?
I understand. I'm with you. No, it's all good.
I wish that's a joke, by the way. If anybody's pays my bill, it pays my paycheck. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I guess, you know, to put the little bow on our advertising for Goldman and Mechanical Sales.
Yeah.
You control your destiny.
Yeah.
And while HVAC is a wildly broad, I mean, we didn't even talk about boilers. We didn't talk about VAV systems. We were just talking about airflow, GRDs, fans. You don't have to be a wizard at everything. If you find some little nugget that you really like, there's a place. And if you want to be talking on the podcast about it, there's a place for that too. There's a lot of opportunities. And what we do know is people aren't going to let you turn off the AC. AC is here to stay. And the heat is one thing. In the, you know, we didn't talk about CO2 yet, but I'm sure where you are in the beautiful country, it'll be beautiful again. The air is very clean. Where we are in Charlotte, there's a lot of construction. Outside air isn't necessarily fresh.
Yeah.
So the system has to condition that or neutralize that, whatever system for our people, because again, we all spend way too much time inside.
That's a whole other subject right there, but an important one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, Andy, I think that tied it off nicely. I love these podcasts sometimes. You know, I used to have them so rigid and structured. We're going to do this, but now I'm just like, we'll talk a little bit about what we're talking about, and then we'll let it go wherever it goes. And I hope that the viewers find that helpful. And I trying to make it more human, like rather than just having a talk technical, like how did you get into the business? What makes it? What's important to you? Those kind of things. So I appreciate you indulging that. And
super important. I appreciate you having me, and I hope you have me back. We can get real technical if you want to, but
that's right.
We can also talk fluffy, which is more fun.
That's right. Thank you, Andy.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Have a great day.
Okay, hang out for a minute if you would. Okay, thank you for listening. Tony Mormino, HVAC TV. We hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. If you want to watch a video version or the rest of our videos, please go to our YouTube channel, HVAC TV. And thank you so much.